"Who let that bum in here?" My father's voice cut through the hushed silence of the funeral chapel like a gunshot. He was standing near the front row, his black Armani suit perfectly pressed, his Rolex catching the light from the stained glass windows, and he was staring toward the back of the chapel with an expression of pure disgust. I turned in my seat to see what had made him so angry. There, in the very last pew, sat a man I had never seen before. He looked to be in his 60s, with long gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, a beard that had not been trimmed in months, and clothes that were worn and dirty. A faded green army jacket with patches sewn over holes, jeans that were more stained than fabric, boots that were held together with duct tape. He looked exactly like what my father had called him, a homeless man who had wandered in off the street. "Security!" my father hissed, snapping his fingers at one of the funeral home staff members standing near the entrance. "Get him out of here immediately. This is a private service for family only." The staff member looked uncomfortable. "Sir," he arrived before the service started. He said he knew the deceased. I do not care what he said. Look at him. He clearly does not belong here. This is my grandfather's funeral, not a homeless shelter. Remove him before he ruins everything. Around me, I could hear other family members murmuring their agreement. My Uncle David was shaking his head in disgust. My Aunt Patricia had her hand pressed to her chest as if the mere sight of the homeless man might give her a heart attack. My cousin Melissa was whispering to her husband, both of them staring at the back of the chapel with barely concealed contempt. I looked at the homeless man again. He was sitting very still, his weathered hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the closed casket at the front of the chapel. He did not look disturbed or dangerous or any of the things my father was implying. He just looked sad and alone, and like maybe he had every right to be there, regardless of what he was wearing or where he had come from. Something inside me snapped. I did not think about what I was doing. I did not calculate the consequences or worry about how my family would react. I simply stood up from my seat in the third row, walked down the center aisle past rows of disapproving relatives, and sat down in the last pew next to the homeless man. "There is room here," I said quietly, looking at him. "You are welcome to stay for the service." The chapel went completely silent. I could feel every single person staring at us, could feel the weight of my father's fury burning into my back, but I kept my eyes forward, my posture calm, refusing to acknowledge their judgment. The homeless man turned to look at me. His eyes were pale blue, faded but sharp, and they studied my face with an intensity that made me feel like he was seeing something deeper than my surface, something essential about who I was. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but steady. "That is very kind of you." My father's reaction was immediate and predictable. "Ethan, get back here right now. This is completely inappropriate. You are embarrassing the entire family." I did not move. I did not even turn around. I just sat there next to the homeless man, while my family whispered and stared, and my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. The minister cleared his throat awkwardly and began the service, his prepared remarks about my great-grandfather's long life filling the chapel with the kind of generic praise that funerals always seem to require. Family members stood one by one to share memories, each story carefully edited to make my great-grandfather, William Harper, sound like some kind of saint instead of the complicated, difficult, often cruel man he had actually been. I sat through it all in silence, hyper-aware of the man beside me. He did not fidget or make noise. He just sat there with his hands folded, his eyes on the casket, lost in thoughts I could not begin to imagine. I had no idea that this simple act of kindness, offering a seat to a stranger my family wanted to throw out, was about to change my entire life. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Ethan Harper. I am 19 years old, and I just finished my first year at Boston University studying engineering. I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, in a wealthy suburb where the houses were massive and the money was old and everyone knew everyone else's business. The Harper family had been prominent in the Boston area for generations. My great-grandfather William had built a successful real estate development company in the 1960s that had made the family wealthy beyond anything most people could imagine. Multiple properties, vacation homes, investment portfolios that generated income while we slept. The kind of wealth that insulated us from the problems ordinary people faced. My father, Robert Harper, was William's grandson and had taken over the family business 10 years ago when my grandfather retired. He ran the company with the same ruthless efficiency that William had demonstrated, prioritizing profit above everything else, including basic human decency. He had raised me and my older sister Claire to be assets to the family name, not individuals with our own dreams or values. Claire was 23 and exactly the daughter my parents had always wanted. Beautiful in that polished, country club way. Charming in social situations. Dating a guy named Bradford whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels. She had gone to an Ivy League school, joined the right sororities, said all the right things at family gatherings. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. And then there was me, the quiet one who preferred video games to networking events, who asked uncomfortable questions at dinner, who had deliberately chosen a state school instead of an Ivy because I wanted to prove I could succeed without the family name opening doors for me. I was the disappointment, the black sheep, the son who could never quite live up to the Harper family standards no matter how hard I tried. You have no ambition, my father told me constantly. No drive, no understanding of what it means to be part of this family. Your great-grandfather built an empire from nothing, and you want to waste your life playing with computers and pretending you are some kind of regular person. He was wrong about the ambition. I had plenty of it. I just did not share his vision of success. I did not want to spend my life exploiting people to maximize profits, attending charity galas where rich people congratulated themselves for donating a tiny fraction of their wealth, pretending to be someone I fundamentally was not, but explaining that to my father was pointless. He had decided who I was when I was still a child, and nothing I said or did would ever change his mind. The only person in my family who ever seemed to see me as something other than a disappointment was my great-grandfather William. Not that he was warm or affectionate. William Harper was not that kind of man. He was formal, emotionally distant, someone who believed that love was demonstrated through financial provision rather than words or physical affection. But sometimes when the family gathered for holidays or special occasions, I would catch him watching me with an expression I could not quite read. It was not the cold disapproval my father showed me, or the dismissive indifference of my mother. It was something else, something like recognition, or maybe regret. And once, about 5 years ago, when I was 14, my great-grandfather had pulled me aside after a particularly brutal family dinner, where my father had spent the entire meal publicly criticizing my decision to take art classes instead of focusing solely on academics that would look good on college applications. We were standing in the hallway outside the dining room, the sounds of conversation and clinking glasses drifting through the closed door. "Do not let them make you into something you are not," William said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I made that mistake once. I let fear and pride and the expectations of others destroy the most important thing in my life. I will not watch you make the same mistake. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? What did you destroy? But my great-grandfather just shook his head, his expression closing off like a door being slammed shut. Someday you will understand. When you are old enough, when you are ready to hear the truth about who this family really is. He walked away without another word, and he never brought it up again. Not once in the 5 years between that conversation and his death last week at the age of 91, until today, when whatever he had been hinting at was about to be revealed in the most unexpected way possible. The funeral service ended with a final prayer and the slow procession of mourners filing past the casket. I stayed in my seat at the back of the chapel, the homeless man still sitting quietly beside me. "The reception is in the next room," I said, turning to face him. "There will be food and drinks. You are welcome to come if you want." He looked at me with those pale blue eyes, and I saw something shift in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or gratitude, or something deeper that I did not have the experience to identify. "You do not know who I am," he said softly, "but you offered me kindness anyway. That is rare, especially in a family like yours." "What do you mean, a family like mine? Do you know my family?" Before he could answer, a funeral director appeared at my side with an apologetic expression. "Mr. Harper, the family is gathering in the Westfield room for the reading of the will. Your presence is required." I glanced at the homeless man, hesitating. "Will you be okay here? Do you need anything?" He smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I will be along shortly. The lawyer is expecting me." The lawyer is expecting him? What did that mean? How could a homeless stranger have any connection to my great-grandfather's attorney? But the funeral director was already guiding me toward the door, and I did not have time to ask more questions. I looked back once as I left the chapel. The homeless man was still sitting there, still staring at the casket with an expression of profound sadness, lost in memories I could not understand. The Westfield room was the funeral home's largest space, elegantly decorated with expensive furniture and tasteful artwork. My family had already claimed their positions like generals on a battlefield. My father stood near the fireplace, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, talking to my Uncle David. My mother sat on a velvet couch with my Aunt Patricia, both of them whispering behind their hands. Claire and her boyfriend Bradford occupied chairs in the corner, looking bored and checking their phones. I stood near the door, feeling like an outsider at my own great-grandfather's funeral, which was exactly what I was. James Whitmore, my great-grandfather's attorney, was a distinguished man in his 70s who had handled the Harper family's legal affairs for decades. He stood at the front of the room now, a leather folder in his hands, waiting for everyone to quiet down. "If everyone could please take a seat," James said, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. "As you know, Mr. Harper left very specific instructions about the distribution of his estate. I will now read the relevant portions of his last will and testament." The room settled into attentive silence. Everyone found seats, the rustle of expensive clothing gradually fading. I took a chair in the back row, as far from my immediate family as possible. The reading proceeded exactly as expected. My great-grandfather's estate was substantial, and he had divided it with careful precision. My father received the family real estate business, the primary residence in Brookline, and the majority of the liquid assets, a fortune that would ensure he never had to work another day, not that he would stop anyway. My Uncle David received several investment properties and a seat on the company board. My mother and Aunt Patricia each received substantial trust funds. Claire received the vacation home in Cape Cod, a portfolio of stocks, and my great-grandmother's jewelry collection. And I received a modest trust fund that had been established when I was born. No property, no business interests, no special bequests. Just the same trust fund I had always known existed, now officially mine without restrictions. My mother reached over and patted my hand sympathetically. "Well, Ethan, at least you have something. And you always said you did not care about family money anyway, right?" My father did not even bother looking at me. He just sat there looking satisfied, as if the will had confirmed what he had always believed. that I was not really a Harper in the ways that mattered. Claire caught my eye from across the room and smirked, clearly enjoying my public humiliation. Bradford whispered something in her ear that made them both laugh, quietly. I felt nothing. I had expected nothing beyond the basic trust fund, and that was exactly what I had received. At least now I could stop hoping that things might be different. Stop thinking that my great-grandfather's occasional moments of attention had meant something more than idle curiosity. But then James Whitmore cleared his throat in a way that made everyone in the room go still. "There is one additional matter," he said, and something in his tone had changed. There was tension there now, anticipation. One final bequest that was not included in the main body of the will. He reached into his folder and withdrew a sealed envelope. Even from across the room, I could see it was old. The paper had yellowed with age, and it was sealed with dark red wax pressed with a signet ring. "This envelope was given to me by Mr. Harper 43 years ago," James explained. He provided very specific instructions that it was only to be opened at the formal reading of his will, and only if a particular condition had been met. "What condition?" my father demanded, setting down his whiskey glass. I reviewed every aspect of my grandfather's estate planning. There was no mention of sealed envelopes or special conditions. James's expression remained professionally neutral. The condition was the presence and treatment of a specific individual at the funeral service, an individual who has just entered the room. Everyone turned toward the doorway. The homeless man was standing there, his shabby clothes and unkempt appearance a stark contrast to the elegant room and well-dressed mourners. My father's face immediately contorted with rage. "I told the staff to keep him out," my father snarled. "This is a private family matter. He has no right to be here." "On the contrary, Mr. Harper," James said calmly but firmly, "according to your great-grandfather's explicit instructions, this gentleman has every right to be present. In fact, his presence and the family's reaction to him were the entire purpose of the condition I mentioned." My mother looked like she might faint. My Uncle David had gone pale. Even Claire had stopped smirking and was staring at the homeless man with undisguised confusion. "Who is he?" I asked, giving voice to the question everyone was thinking but seemed afraid to ask. "Why is his presence a condition of anything?" James turned to the homeless man and inclined his head respectfully. "Perhaps you would like to explain, sir?" The homeless man walked slowly into the room, his worn boots making soft sounds on the hardwood floor. He moved with careful dignity, despite his ragged appearance. He stopped in the center of the room and looked around at all the hostile, confused faces. Then he fixed his gaze on my father. "You do not know who I am, Robert," he said, his rough voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "But you should. I am Daniel Harper, William's son, your uncle, though you have never met me." The room exploded into chaos. My father was on his feet, shouting about fraud and con artists and impossible claims. My mother had her hand pressed to her chest, gasping for breath. My Uncle David was frantically typing on his phone, presumably calling his own lawyer. Claire looked genuinely shocked for the first time in her life, and I was sitting absolutely still, my mind racing back to that conversation 5 years ago. I let fear and pride destroy the most important thing in my life. His son, this homeless man, was my great-grandfather's son, my father's uncle, a man whose existence had been completely erased from our family history. "That is impossible," my father finally managed to say, his voice shaking with fury. "My grandfather had one child, my father. There was never any mention of another son. I have seen all the family records, all the documents. There was no Daniel Harper." Daniel smiled that sad, weary smile I had seen in the chapel. "William told everyone I died in 1981. A drug overdose in San Francisco. Very tragic." Very embarrassing. And completely, entirely false. I have been alive all these 43 years, living right here in Massachusetts, while your grandfather told the world I was dead and buried. Why? The word escaped before I could stop it. Why would he tell everyone you were dead? Why would anyone do that to their own son? Daniel turned to look at me, and I saw recognition in his pale blue eyes. Recognition and something that looked almost like pride, because I made a choice he could not accept. Daniel said quietly, "When I was 25 years old, I fell in love with a woman named Teresa. She was a waitress at a diner near the waterfront. She came from a poor family, had no education beyond high school, no connections, nothing that the Harper family would consider valuable. My father forbade me from seeing her. He said she was beneath us, that she would ruin the family reputation, that I had to end the relationship immediately." "And you refused," I said softly. "I refused. I told him I was going to marry her whether he approved or not, and he gave me an ultimatum. Give her up completely or lose everything. My inheritance, my place in the family business, my name, my very existence as far as the family was concerned. And you chose her. I chose her, without hesitation, without regret. Teresa and I were married 6 months later. We had 38 years together, before she died of cancer 5 years ago. We never had much money. We lived in a small apartment in Dorchester, worked regular jobs, struggled to make ends meet sometimes. But we had each other. We had love. We had a life that was ours, built on our own terms, without the weight of family expectations crushing us." My Uncle David made a disgusted sound. "So you threw away an entire fortune for some waitress, and now you have come crawling back looking for money after all these years? That is pathetic." "I am not here looking for money," Daniel said, and there was steel in his voice now. "William wrote to me for the last 20 years of his life, through Mr. Whitmore, so the letters could not be traced back to him. He spent 2 decades trying to explain himself, trying to apologize, trying to reach out to the son he had disowned. I only received those letters after he died, when Mr. Whitmore finally sent them to me." James Whitmore stepped forward. "It is true. Mr. Harper maintained a separate correspondence with his son for many years, all handled through my office with strict confidentiality. The letters were to be delivered to Daniel only after William's death." "Fine," my father snapped. "So our grandfather had regrets. So what? That does not change anything about his will or his estate. Everything has already been distributed according to his wishes." James held up the sealed envelope. "Not quite everything, Mr. Harper. This envelope contains instructions for a final bequest that was deliberately excluded from the main will, and the conditions for that bequest have now been revealed." He carefully broke the wax seal, the soft crack audible in the silent room. He withdrew several documents and a letter written in my great-grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "The letter is addressed to the family," James announced. "With Mr. Harper's permission, I will read it aloud." My father looked like he wanted to object, but he seemed to realize that fighting would only make things worse. He sat down heavily, his whiskey glass forgotten. James began to read. "To my family, if you are hearing these words, then I am dead, and my son Daniel is present at my funeral. The bequest I am about to describe depends entirely on how you treated him. Not how you treated him once you knew who he was, but how you treated him when you thought he was just a homeless stranger who had wandered into a private service." I felt my heart begin to pound. A test. My great-grandfather had created a test. 43 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life. My son fell in love with a woman I deemed inappropriate, and I gave him an impossible choice. I forced him to choose between his family and his heart, and when he chose love over money, I disowned him. I told the world he was dead. I erased him from our family history as if he had never existed. James paused, looking around the room at the stunned faces. For 4 decades, I convinced myself I had made the right choice, that I was protecting the family name, maintaining our standards, doing what was necessary. But I was wrong. I was a coward and a fool. My son chose the brave path, the honest path, the path of integrity, and I punished him for it. My mother was crying softly. My Uncle David looked like he had been punched. Even Claire seemed affected, her usual smirk completely gone. I spent the last years of my life trying to make amends. I wrote to Daniel, though I never had the courage to approach him directly. I told him I was sorry. I told him I was proud of the life he had built. I told him that he was a better man than I ever was. But apologies are not enough, so I created this test. I arranged for Daniel to attend my funeral dressed as a homeless man. I wanted to see if my family had learned anything. I wanted to know if you would treat a stranger with compassion, or if you would react with the same cruel pride and prejudice that drove my son away. James looked up from the letter, his eyes finding mine across the room. The bequest is simple, he continued reading. Everything I own that was not included in the main will goes to the first member of the family who showed genuine kindness to Daniel at my funeral, the person who offered him a seat, the person who sat with him despite family pressure, the person who saw a human being instead of a problem to be removed. My father's face had gone from red to white. You cannot be serious. This is insane. A test. At a funeral. The assets in question, James continued calmly, include the family estate in Manchester by the Sea, which has been held in a separate trust for 43 years. The property is currently valued at $4.2 million. There is also an investment account, also held separately, with a current balance of approximately $800,000. $800,000. The number seemed to echo through the room like a thunderclap. This is absurd, my father shouted, finally losing his composure completely. This cannot be legal. You cannot distribute an estate based on some sick test at a funeral. I will challenge this. I will take this to court. I will not allow some ridiculous game to determine who gets family property. The assets in question were never part of the family estate, James explained patiently. Mr. Harper established these accounts and holdings specifically to remain outside any shared family structures. The legal work is impeccable. I helped him structure it precisely to withstand any challenge. These assets are his to distribute as he sees fit, under any conditions he chooses to establish. Then who? My father demanded. Who passed this supposed test? Who was stupid enough to sit with a homeless man and embarrass the entire family? James looked directly at me. Ethan Harper showed compassion to a stranger when the rest of the family showed only contempt. According to the explicit terms of his great-grandfather's final wishes, he is the sole beneficiary of these assets. Every single person in the room turned to stare at me. I sat there in my chair near the back, feeling like I had suddenly become a stranger in my own life. A house worth over $4 million, $800,000 in cash. My great-grandfather had set aside a fortune over decades, specifically for whoever in the family proved they had the basic human decency to treat his son with kindness. And I was the only one who had passed. I thought about all the years of being dismissed, overlooked, told I was a disappointment. I thought about my father's constant criticism, my mother's indifference, Claire's smug superiority. I thought about how they had wanted to throw Daniel out of the funeral like garbage. And I thought about a moment in a chapel an hour ago when I had simply walked to the back and offered a stranger a seat, not because I was trying to pass a test, not because I expected anything in return, just because it was the right thing to do. James handed me a separate document, a personal letter written in my great-grandfather's handwriting. I read it while everyone in the room watched, waiting. Ethan, if you are reading this, you have done what I hoped you would do. You showed kindness to a stranger when everyone else showed cruelty. You proved that you have the character that this family so desperately needs and so rarely demonstrates. The money and property are yours. Use them however you see fit, but they come with one request. Get to know your Uncle Daniel. Let him tell you about the life he lived, the choices he made, the path he chose, and then decide for yourself what kind of man you want to be. You remind me of him. You have his integrity, his compassion, his refusal to be molded into something you are not. That is not a weakness. It is your greatest strength. I am proud of you in a way I was never proud of your father or grandfather. You are the best of us. Do not let them convince you otherwise. Your great-grandfather, William. I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in my jacket pocket. When I looked up, my father was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not disapproval, something more complicated, something that looked almost like fear. "This is not over," he said, his voice tight. "I will challenge this. Every legal avenue, every technicality. I will not let you steal what belongs to this family." "The assets were never part of the family holdings," James repeated calmly. "Mr. Harper structured them specifically to be beyond any legal challenge. The work is bulletproof. I spent 40 years making certain of it." My father looked like he wanted to argue further, but my mother placed a hand on his arm. "Richard, not here, not now." Her voice was quiet but firm. For the first time I could remember, she was telling him to stop. He shook off her hand and stormed out of the room. Claire followed, shooting me a look of pure venom as she passed. My Uncle David lingered for a moment, clearly torn between loyalty to his brother and the realization that fighting would be pointless. "You do not deserve this," he finally said to me. "You have done nothing to earn this family's money." "You are right," I said quietly. "I have not earned anything. I just treated a person with basic human decency. If that makes me undeserving in your eyes, I am okay with that." He left without another word, followed by most of the other relatives who had been watching the drama unfold. Within minutes, the room was nearly empty except for me, Daniel, and James Whitmore. The old homeless man walked slowly toward me, his worn boots shuffling on the floor. Up close, I could see the family resemblance more clearly now. The same strong jawline as my great-grandfather, the same high cheekbones, the same pale blue eyes. But where William's eyes had been calculating and cold in his later years, Daniel's held something warmer. Sadder, yes, but warmer. "You did not know," Daniel said softly. "When you offered me a seat, you had no idea who I was or what was at stake. You just saw someone who looked like they needed kindness. That is rare, especially in a family like ours." "I still do not understand why he did this," I said. "Why create such an elaborate test? Why not just leave the money to you directly?" "Because he wanted to see if the family had changed, if the next generation might be different from him. He spent his whole life valuing money and status above everything else, and it cost him his son. He wanted to know if anyone in the family had learned from his mistakes. And I was the only one who passed. You were the only one who saw me as a human being instead of a problem." I thought about my father's immediate demand for security, my uncle's disgusted expressions, Claire's mockery. All of them had looked at Daniel and seen only someone who did not belong, someone who lowered the tone of the proceedings, someone to be removed as quickly as possible. "What happened after he disowned you?" I asked. "How did you survive?" Daniel smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in it. "Teresa and I got married in a small ceremony with just a few friends. We found an apartment in Dorchester. I got a job as a carpenter. She worked as a secretary. We did not have much, but we had enough, and we had each other. Were you happy? I was happier than I ever would have been living the life my father wanted me to live. Teresa was the love of my life. She saw me for who I really was, not the Harper name, or the family money, or any of that. Just me. That was worth more than any inheritance. What happened to her? Cancer. 5 years ago. It was fast, which was a blessing in some ways. We had 38 years together. 38 years of love and laughter and building a life on our own terms. When she died, I fell apart, lost the apartment, lost the job, ended up on the streets for a while. Your great-grandfather tried to reach out then, through Mr. Whitmore, but I was not ready to forgive him. Not yet. And now he is gone, and I have had time to read his letters, to understand his regrets. I do not know if I can fully forgive what he did to me, but I can appreciate that he tried, in his own way, to make amends. This test he created, this inheritance he set up for you, it was his way of trying to break the cycle, of making sure at least one person in the family would have the resources to choose a different path. James Whitmore cleared his throat gently. I have the paperwork ready, whenever you are prepared to sign, Ethan. The transfer of the property and the investment account can be completed within a few days. I looked at the documents he was holding, legal papers that would make me wealthy beyond anything I had ever imagined, financially independent from my family at 19 years old, free to make my own choices, without worrying about my father's approval or his threats to cut me off. But I looked at Daniel too, this man who had given up everything for love, who had spent decades living a modest life because he refused to compromise his integrity, who was still, after everything, able to offer kindness and wisdom to a nephew he had just met. I want to split it, I said suddenly. The money, not the house. Half for me, half for Daniel. He is the one who was robbed of his inheritance. This is his money more than it is mine. Daniel shook his head firmly. No, William wanted you to have this. He set it up specifically for whoever passed his test. That was you. But you are his son. You are the one he wronged. You should not be homeless. You should not have to struggle after everything you have been through. I am not homeless anymore, Daniel said with a slight smile. Your great-grandfather actually bought me a small apartment about a year ago through Mr. Whitmore. He made sure I had a place to live, that my rent was paid, that I had enough to get by. The whole homeless appearance today was part of the test. William asked me to dress this way, to look like someone the family would want to throw out. I agreed, because I wanted to see it too. I wanted to know if anyone in the Harper family had learned to value people over appearances. And I was the only one. You were the only one. That says something about who you are, Ethan. Do not throw away that integrity by refusing a gift that was meant for you. Your great-grandfather wanted you to have the freedom to choose your own path. Let him give you that. I signed the papers, all of them. James Whitmore witnessed the signatures and promised to have everything transferred within the week. The house in Manchester by the Sea would be mine. The $800,000 would be deposited into an account in my name. At 19 years old, I would be financially independent from the family that had spent my entire life telling me I was not good enough. In the months that followed, I took a semester off from school to process everything that had happened and to figure out what I wanted to do with this unexpected freedom. My father had expected me to come crawling back, apologizing, offering to split the inheritance in exchange for being welcomed back into the family. But I never did, and he never forgave me for that. I spent those months getting to know Daniel, really know him, in a way I had never known anyone in my family before. We met for coffee every morning at a small diner in Cambridge, the kind of place where the waitresses knew everyone's names and the coffee was always hot and terrible. Daniel loved it there. He said it reminded him of the diner where he had met Teresa all those years ago. Tell me about her. I said one morning, about 3 weeks after the funeral. We were sitting in our usual booth by the window, watching the city wake up around us. Tell me about Teresa. What was she like? Daniel's weathered face softened in a way I was beginning to recognize. The way he always looked when he thought about his wife. She was the kindest person I have ever known, he said quietly. Not in a performative way. Not in the way wealthy people are kind, because it makes them feel good about themselves. She was kind because she genuinely cared about people. She saw suffering and she wanted to help. It was just who she was. He told me how they had met. He had been 23, freshly graduated from Harvard with a business degree he had never wanted, being groomed to take over the family company someday. His father had insisted he learn the business from the ground up, so he had been spending time at one of the Harper properties near the waterfront, supposedly learning about property management, but mostly feeling suffocated by the life that had been planned for him. Teresa had been working at a diner 2 blocks from the property. She was 21, supporting her younger siblings after their parents had died in a car accident. No college education, no prospects beyond waitressing, and maybe eventually becoming a manager someday. Exactly the kind of person the Harper family would never notice, never value, never consider worthy of their time. I went to that diner every day for lunch, Daniel said, smiling at the memory. At first I told myself it was because the food was cheap and good, but really it was because I wanted to see her. She had this smile, this way of making everyone feel like they mattered. She remembered names, asked about people's lives, actually listened when they answered. In a world where everyone wanted something from me, because of my family name, she just saw me. Regular customer, guy who always ordered the same sandwich, person she could talk to during her break. When did you tell her who you were? About a month in. She figured it out first, actually. Someone mentioned the Harper name, made some comment about the properties we owned. She did not treat me any differently after she knew, did not suddenly become interested in my money or my family connections. She just kept being Teresa, kept bringing me coffee and asking about my day and telling me about her siblings and their homework struggles and her dreams of maybe opening her own restaurant someday. What did your father say when he found out you were seeing her? Daniel's expression darkened. He was furious, absolutely furious. He said I was throwing away everything the family had built, that I was embarrassing him, degrading the Harper name by associating with someone so far beneath our station. He forbade me from seeing her, told me if I did not end it immediately, there would be consequences. And you did not end it. I could not. By that point, I was already in love with her. And more than that, I had started to see how toxic my family's values were. The way they looked down on everyone who did not have money or status. The way they treated people like Teresa as if they were less than human. I did not want to be that person. I did not want to spend my life becoming what my father was. So you made a choice. I made a choice. I told Teresa everything. Told her about my family, about the inheritance I would be giving up, about the fact that choosing her meant walking away from everything I had ever known. I gave her a chance to back out, to tell me it was not worth it. But she looked at me with those dark eyes and said, I am not asking you to give up anything. I am just asking you to be yourself. If being yourself means walking away from your family, then do it. But do it for you, not for me. That is when you decided. That is when I knew. I went to my father the next day and told him I was going to marry Teresa, whether he approved or not. He gave me one last chance to change my mind. Said if I walked out that door, I could never come back. That I would be dead to him, dead to the family, erased from the Harper history as if I had never existed. And you walked out. I walked out. Teresa and I got married 6 weeks later in a tiny ceremony at City Hall with just her siblings and a couple of our friends. We spent our honeymoon weekend in a motel in New Hampshire, because that was all we could afford, and it was perfect. It was more perfect than any expensive wedding or exotic honeymoon could have been, because it was ours. We chose it. We built it with our own hands. I listened to Daniel's stories day after day, and each one showed me a version of happiness I had never known existed. Not the performative happiness of family gatherings, where everyone smiled for photos while quietly resenting each other, but real happiness, the kind that comes from building a life with someone you actually love in a way that reflects your actual values. What was it like? I asked one morning, the years right after you got married, when you did not have any money, when you were starting from nothing. Terrifying, Daniel admitted, and exhilarating. We lived in a tiny studio apartment in Dorchester, one room, a bathroom down the hall that we shared with 3 other units. No air conditioning, heat that barely worked in the winter. I got a job as a carpenter's apprentice because I had always liked working with my hands. Teresa kept waitressing and took on extra shifts when she could. We were exhausted all the time. We lived on pasta and canned soup. Our idea of a date night was taking the subway to the public library and reading books we could not afford to buy. That sounds awful. It should have been, but it was not, because we were together, because we were choosing our life instead of having it chosen for us. Teresa would come home from a double shift, so tired she could barely stand, and she would still smile when she saw me. We would make dinner together in our tiny kitchen, fighting over the one working burner on the stove, laughing about the ridiculous things customers had said that day. And then we would fall asleep in our second-hand bed, and I would think, I am happier right now than I ever was in my father's mansion. Did you ever regret it? When things were really hard, did you ever wish you had made a different choice? Daniel looked at me with absolute certainty. Never. Not once. Not even when Teresa got sick and we had to decide between paying for experimental treatment or keeping our apartment. Not even when she died and I felt like my entire world had collapsed. Because I had 38 years with the woman I loved. 38 years of building something real. That is worth more than any amount of money or status or family approval. I thought about my own life, about the expensive schools and designer clothes and European vacations that my family had always presented as signs of success. And I realized none of it had made me happy. None of it had given me the kind of bone-deep satisfaction that Daniel had found in his tiny apartment with his waitress wife and their modest, honest life. As the weeks went by, Daniel helped me make decisions about what to do with my inheritance. I kept the house in Manchester by the Sea, but decided to rent out the second floor as affordable housing for graduate students at the nearby university. I used part of the investment money to pay for my remaining college expenses, ensuring I could finish my degree without depending on my father for anything. And I set up a scholarship fund at Boston University for first-generation college students, kids like Teresa's siblings who had potential, but no family money to help them succeed. Your great-grandfather would approve of this, Daniel told me when I explained my plans. Not the William Harper who disowned his own son, but the one he became at the end. The one who spent 20 years writing me letters he was too proud to send while I was alive to receive them. The one who realized too late that he had valued all the wrong things. Did you read all the letters? I asked. The ones he sent through Mr. Whitmore? Every single one. Multiple times. Would you like to see them? Daniel brought me a shoebox full of letters the next time we met. Decades of correspondence. All written in my great-grandfather's distinctive handwriting. All expressing variations on the same theme. Regret, apology, the desperate wish to undo choices that could not be undone. I read them late into the night, sitting in the library of my new house, and a more complete picture of William Harper emerged. Not the cold patriarch I had known, but a complicated man who had made terrible choices and spent the last decades of his life trying to atone for them. In one letter from 15 years ago, Daniel, I saw you yesterday outside the grocery store in Dorchester. You did not see me. You were with Teresa, carrying bags, laughing about something. You looked happy. You looked more genuinely happy than I have felt in my entire life. I sat in my car and watched you walk away, and I realized you won. You chose love over money, integrity over status, and you won everything that matters. In another from 10 years ago, I am dying slowly, though the doctors assure me I have years yet. But I feel it, the weight of my mistakes, the burden of having driven away the best part of myself. You were always braver than me, Daniel. You always had the courage to be who you actually were. I spent my whole life being what other people wanted, and it left me hollow, empty, a wealthy shell of a person who built an empire but lost his son. And in the final letter, written just months before he died, I have set something in motion that I hope will break the cycle. A test, a way to see if anyone in the family has learned what I failed to learn until it was too late. I think there is one who might pass it. Ethan, your nephew. Though you have never met him, he reminds me of you. The same quiet integrity, the same refusal to pretend to be something he is not. If I am right, if he passes the test, then perhaps something good can come from all of this pain. Perhaps one Harper will be free to choose a different path. I set down the final letter with tears streaming down my face. My great-grandfather had seen me, really seen me, not the disappointing son who refused to conform to family expectations, but someone worth believing in. Someone who might be capable of breaking the cycle that had defined the Harper family for generations. He loved you, Daniel said quietly. He had been sitting across from me while I read, watching my reactions to his brother's words. In his own broken way, he truly loved you. He just did not know how to show it while he was alive. The test, the inheritance, all of it was his way of trying to give you what he never gave me. The freedom to choose. I wish I had known him better, the real him, not the cold version he showed everyone. He did not know how to be anything else, not in person, not where people could see him. Fear of vulnerability, fear of showing weakness. It was bred into him by our father. The letters were the only way he could be honest. The test was the only way he could give you a gift without having to admit what it meant. My relationship with my immediate family continued to deteriorate through this period. My father sent lawyers with cease and desist letters, threatening to sue if I did not stop disparaging the family name. I had not said anything publicly, but apparently my refusal to attend family events or pretend everything was fine constituted disparagement in his view. My mother sent occasional guilt-tripping text messages about how much I was hurting everyone by being so selfish. Claire posted passive-aggressive social media updates about family loyalty and people who betray their own blood for money. I blocked most of them, changed my phone number, made it clear through Mr. Whitmore that any further legal threats would be met with a countersuit for harassment. And slowly, painfully, I built a new definition of family that did not include the people who had spent my entire life making me feel worthless. Daniel became that family. His old friends from the Dorchester neighborhood, people who had known him and Teresa for decades, welcomed me into their circle. I met Sam, who had worked with Daniel at the carpenter shop. I met Rosa, who had been Teresa's best friend, and who could tell stories about her that made me feel like I had known her. I met Father Miguel from the community center where Daniel had volunteered after Teresa died, teaching carpentry to at-risk youth. These people had nothing in terms of wealth or status, but they had integrity, they had loyalty, they had the kind of authentic love and care that my family's money could never buy. "This is what I tried to tell your great-grandfather," Daniel said one evening as we sat on the porch of my Manchester house. surrounded by friends who had come for a cookout, that there are different ways to measure a life, that the richness of your relationships matters more than the size of your bank account. He did not understand it then, but I think he understood it at the end. That is why he created the test. That is why he left everything to you. 3 months after the funeral, I returned to Boston University to finish my degree. But everything felt different now. I was not the same person I had been before. I was not trying to prove anything to anyone. I was not measuring my worth by my father's standards. I was just Ethan, a guy who liked engineering, who was learning to build things with his hands, who was figuring out what kind of life he wanted to create. I graduated the following spring with honors. Daniel was the only family member who attended my graduation. He sat in the audience, wearing an old suit he had borrowed, cheering louder than anyone when my name was called. My father, mother, and sister were notably absent. They sent no card, no message, no acknowledgement that I had accomplished anything. And I realized I did not need their acknowledgement anymore. The only approval that mattered was my own. Daniel died last winter, just as I was starting to apply for graduate programs in engineering. He went to sleep one night and simply did not wake up. Heart failure, the coroner said. Quick and painless. At least there was that small mercy. His funeral was everything my great-grandfather's had not been. No expensive chapel, no formal reception, no designer suits and forced tears. Just a gathering at the community center where Daniel had volunteered, with people who had actually known him and loved him for who he was. Sam spoke about Daniel's generosity with his time and skills. Rosa shared stories about the love between Daniel and Teresa that had inspired everyone who knew them. Father Miguel talked about integrity, about living according to your values, even when it cost you everything. I spoke last. I told them about the test at my great-grandfather's funeral, about sitting next to a stranger and changing my entire life, about the months I had spent learning from this man who had given up an empire for love and never regretted it for a single moment. Daniel taught me that courage is not about grand gestures, I said, looking at the faces of people who had loved him. It is about the small, daily choice to be honest, to treat people with dignity, to value integrity over status, to choose love over fear. He lived those choices for 68 years, and in his final months, he taught me to make those choices too. That is his legacy, not money or property, but the example of a life lived with absolute authenticity. I buried him next to Teresa in a modest cemetery in Dorchester. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates, and a quote Teresa had loved. Love is not what you say. Love is what you do. It was perfect. It was exactly what they would have wanted. Now, a year later, I am in graduate school at MIT studying sustainable engineering. I am working on designs for affordable housing that could actually help families like Daniel and Teresa's. I am building a life that reflects my values, not my family's expectations. And I carry with me the lessons from a homeless man at a funeral who turned out to be the richest person I have ever known. My father still has not spoken to me. Claire has made it clear I am permanently uninvited from family events. My mother sends occasional emails asking if I am ready to apologize and come back to the family, as if I am the one who needs forgiveness. But I am not going back. I do not need to. Because I learned something that day at my great-grandfather's funeral that my family still has not figured out, that the most valuable inheritance is not money or property. It is the freedom to choose who you want to be, and the courage to live that choice every single day, even when everyone around you thinks you are making a mistake. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are. My father stopped speaking to me entirely, still furious about the inheritance he believed I had stolen. My mother sent occasional text messages asking how I was, but the warmth was gone. Claire cut me off completely, blocking my number and unfriending me on every social media platform. But I was okay with that. Better than okay, actually. For the first time in my life, I was not trying to earn their approval. I was not measuring myself against their impossible standards. I was not pretending to be someone I fundamentally was not. I was free. Daniel became a regular presence in my life. We had dinner together every week, sometimes at nice restaurants, sometimes at cheap diners that reminded him of where he had met Teresa. He taught me to play chess, told me stories about my great-grandfather's youth that no one else in the family remembered, helped me understand that wealth and status were poor substitutes for integrity and love. He died last winter, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. It was sudden and unexpected, and it left a hole in my life that I am still learning to navigate. But before he died, he told me something I have held on to. Your great-grandfather's test was not just about kindness, he said. We were sitting in his small apartment, the one William had secretly bought for him, surrounded by photographs of Teresa and mementos from their life together. It was about seeing people as they actually are, not as society tells us they should be. The homeless man at the funeral was me, but he was also everyone who does not fit into neat categories. Everyone who gets dismissed because they do not look right or sound right or have the right background. Your great-grandfather wanted to know if anyone in the family had learned to see past those superficial judgments. And you did. That is your inheritance, Ethan. Not the money. The ability to see people as they are. I carry those words with me every day when I make decisions about my career, my relationships, my life. When I am tempted to judge someone based on appearances or status or background. When I need to remember why I walked to the back of that chapel and offered a stranger a seat. The money from my great-grandfather's inheritance has given me freedom. The house in Manchester by the Sea has given me a place to think and plan and build a future on my own terms. But the real gift was the lesson. That kindness matters more than status. That integrity is worth more than wealth. That seeing people as they actually are, treating them with dignity regardless of their circumstances, is the measure of who we are as human beings. My great-grandfather learned that lesson too late, after he had already lost his son, but he tried to pass it on to me through an elaborate test that revealed everything about who my family really was and who I had the potential to become. I passed his test, and in doing so, I inherited more than money or property. I inherited the possibility of becoming a different kind of Harper, the kind my great-grandfather wished he had been, the kind Daniel showed me was possible. That is worth more than any amount of money. Thank you for listening to my story of growing up faster than I ever wanted to. I have left 2 more stories on your screen, both from young men who learned that sometimes becoming an adult does not happen at 18. It happens the moment your family needs you to be strong. Click on whichever one speaks to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be forced to grow up overnight, that notification bell is waiting. Until tomorrow, remember, age is just a number, but courage defines who you really are.